In this video, we're going to go behind the scenes on the visual effects breakdown for Zack Snyder's The Army of the Dead. This is part 3 in the 5-part series. We're exploring the creature effects, including Valentine, the zombie tiger, and many of the zombies. Throughout this video, we're going to go deep into deconstructing the visual effects process of the film from the unique perspective of a visual effects supervisor. We'll discuss the work involved, the techniques, the technology, the process, all the key sequences of the film, and how all of them were created. I'm Allan McKay. I'm a visual effects supervisor in Hollywood. I've been working in the industry for over 25 years for studios like Industrial Light and Magic and dozens of other leading visual effects studios. On projects like Game of Thrones, Transformers, Star Trek, Superman Returns, Avengers Endgame, and many others. My goal is to teach artists and creators the skills and the knowledge to build a successful career in the creative industry, as well as the business side of being an artist. This is a 5-part video series. Each day this week, I'll be reviewing a new sequence of the film, as well as a compilation of all the visual effects at the end of the week. The goal is simply to break down and explain the shots and the challenges for each of these sequences, and share my thoughts as a visual effects supervisor on how I would approach a lot of these shots. Typically, we're handed a script. We've got to break down exactly what we need to do and allocate the right studios and the right people to each of these sequences. So this is an opportunity to be able to break down my thoughts on how I would approach a lot of these sequences, and also discuss a lot of what's involved in that creative process. By the way, if you're enjoying the series, all the content that I have on this channel I make for free. All I ask in return is if you could please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It won't mean much to you, but it'll mean the world to me. And you won't miss out on any of the upcoming material that I'll be putting out daily. Finally, if there's a particular movie that you want to see covered in the upcoming visual effects breakdowns, let me know. Leave a comment below, as well as any questions that you might have about anything that wasn't covered or discussed here. I'm happy to answer all of that as well. So, let's get started. So this is one of the sequences I figured might be a little bit bare, just because I don't really know what we can really get into when it comes to the creature effects, just because I can break down a bit of the process and my thoughts on it, but I feel like beyond that, it's kind of going to be the same shots over and over. I could be wrong about that. This will be interesting to dive into it and talk a little bit about it. So let's just see what we come up with. So the initial sequence, this shot here, is where they first introduce the cat walking through. A couple of things I'll just quickly mention. It's subtle, but you can see there's like dust moving through. Again, some of the times that we've seen dust popping up, it's kind of there to really kind of blend everything in with the environment, but it's a little bit overkill at times. So anyway, this is funny because I'm noticing dust when bullets go through glass, just with everything. It's kind of like throw dust on it seems to be the main thing. And I kind of like how this is introduced, because the first 2 shots, it's kind of like, what is that? And it's also not the focal point. Your eye is kind of more on them, and also the fact that they are hiding. There's this big wide open shot. It's very busy. You don't really know what you're looking at. And it's kind of only over here that you begin to see the tiger start to walk through the shot. And same thing here, because at this point you're kind of like, what is that? You know, and so you're building anticipation by not revealing the creature. It's kind of like in the 90s when CGI was less common. That's something you would do a lot, is you would not show the creature until the very end. Is this the payoff? Once you've seen it, the kind of mystery goes away from it. And so it's the anticipation of not really knowing what you're looking at. Predator, everything else had done that as well with special effects, but it's kind of like once you've seen it, you're like, okay, whatever. And that's why with this, there's so many creatures, so it's not like you're fixated on one, but you're delaying the gratification of like getting to see like what it is. And then finally here you get to see it jumping on the hood. I'd assume that this is practical. So when working on set, animals and children are the worst to work with because they're not able to take direction and also can be quite unpredictable at times. And because of that, you can't really go and have a tiger go and perform the actions you want. You can get some walk cycles, things like that, like ILM during Day After Tomorrow when that movie came out. I feel like that was one of the first times where they'd gone and done a bunch of motion capture of these Rottweilers that they had later in the movie. So the dogs were CG, but the performance was being captured by a few different dogs, as well as trainers who were going in and getting them to perform the motions. And then from there, you're tweening everything and trying to get more of the performance that you want from it. For something like this, I feel like the reoccurring theme with this movie has been just make everything digital, and that way we've got complete freedom to get the results we want. I believe that DNEG did all this stuff, and they have 8,000 employees spanned across multiple countries, so they're a monster these days. In fact, one of my buddies is client-side VFX souping a few different projects right now that he has DNEG working for them, and it's just been interesting to kind of see those interactions with them. They're very capable of doing creature work, that's for sure. So doing something like this isn't really out of their capability at all. This is really the big reveal, and this is why also you get this kind of towering down shot. It's a chance to really kind of soak it in, like what you're looking at. And this is why, most thumbnails and all the publicity stuff for the zombie tiger, Valentine, I believe was the name of the tiger, has all mostly been through these shots, because it's the big close-ups you get of it, and the rest of the show you're not really seeing it too much. But the challenge here is that you have this beautiful tiger, and you need to make it decayed and ugly and also look quite threatening. I already had someone in the comments on one of the earlier videos mention that it reminds them of Annihilation with I think it's more of a bear than a tiger, but obviously it's kind of mutated into its own thing, but it's kind of the same thing where its skeleton became on the exterior of itself instead of underneath the skin. Whereas here you're actually getting to see a lot of that as well. So I feel like a lot of the time the big challenges are always going to be in the performance. It's not that difficult to do animals that look real these days. I've worked on some projects going back as far as 2001 where we had to do these photoreal CG bears, and they held up. They worked pretty well. It's the performance, getting all the nuances. Even here, if you look, there's some really nice subtleties. Like you see here, he's able to lift up his jowl a little bit. In fact, the first ever commercial I ever worked on was animating talking dogs. And I had to do all that, like figure out how to animate the jowls and make the mouth move to talk and make all the phonemes. You got some shots like this that I kind of wonder whether they're completely digital. I feel like you would probably shoot it in real life, IRL. You would probably shoot this shot on set, but then it would just make sense, like, why don't we just go digital and get complete freedom? So kind of mimic that result. Because I feel like those rocks and everything are dynamic. I feel like the rocks is really what makes the shot, and that's what is, again, one of the reoccurring themes with these breakdowns, is that it's all the secondary effects that really make things work, that integration. Adding dust everywhere, sometimes is overkill, but adding, rocks bouncing off the hood as the pressure of the car. It's a heavy tiger, right? I forget like what something like this would weigh, but having those subtleties, those little effects really help. So the way that they're doing this, and I've seen some of the breakdowns, I didn't really watch through them, but you've got a person in a green suit basically acting out the motions, and it's not really for motion reference, like it's not really to get the performance so much as it is to get interaction. Let's say if you're walking on the car hood and you want it to press down, but it's also for blocking, to figure out the placement of where the tiger is going to be, because it's really hard to shoot something like this and not have anything in frame. And that's why, like, a good example would be Gollum, as one of the first examples of having Andy Serkis in the shots doing the motion, and then they go through and they would actually keyframe a lot of this. And that's a conversation for another time about all this, but I've got so many friends who are animators at Weta who aren't the biggest fans of Andy Serkis, just because he's definitely trash-talked VFX quite a lot. It's funny that it's kind of like Michael Bay has as well. But the funny thing about it is that a lot of Lord of the Rings was all keyframed. It wasn't performance capture or anything like that. It's great to have reference, but at the same time, like, you're going in and doing your own performance. It's not you going and magically taking his performance with some tracking markers and getting that result. And it's the same thing here. It's important to have something to shoot, but at the same time, like, the performance that you're going to see of the tiger is going to be keyframed. It's going to be the animators who really bring this to life. And that's what really sells it. Even out of focus here, the animation's beautiful. You can see it, it feels real. The way that the tiger doesn't just walk in the direction it needs to go, it's walking to the left because it's curious, and then it starts to look to the right and venture off that way. So it's little subtle things like that that just are really amazing. And that's one thing I'll quickly mention. I'd love your feedback on this. If these videos are going way too granular on the overall stuff, and you're just like, Allan, just talk about deconstructing this specific shot, I'm happy to do that. Just some of the feedback I've gotten, it's just, you know, it's clear that some people just want to know the overall process. And so I bring this up because you've got two types of animators. You've got character animators who do Pixar, Disney, very kind of cutesy, stylized animation, you know, more traditionally squash and stretch animation. And then you have creature animation, which is more about creating or recreating the realism of an animal, of a dinosaur, or some mythical creature. And that's about weighting it into the real world. And weighting it in the real world is probably not the best words to use here, just because I'm about to say that it's also about getting the timing and the weight distribution and everything to work as well. But it's about bringing it into the real world and making it believable. And that comes down to both having it emote and act like a real creature, but at the same time, simulate the behavior of a real creature as well. And so a lot of the subtleties that you look at here are just really amazing. Having it stop and look around, and it doesn't have a very specific direction right off the bat. This animal is going about its day. It's not specifically going with intent, walking around looking for something. It's just navigating through the environment and also looking around at, is there something to hunt? Is there something to do? And it's also interesting just to talk about the decay and everything else. Motion blur plays such a big role in this stuff. Like, I think back to The Mummy as the first time I really appreciated like quality motion blur and how much it can really tie something into the shot. Because a lot of the time when we're working on these detailed creatures or detailed shots, we want everyone to see and appreciate the work that we're doing. And because of that, we want it to be overlit. We want it to be in frame, in focus, dial down the motion blur, see all the detail. And a lot of the times it's really hard to pick a single frame where you get to really look at this and appreciate like everything. It's always blurred somewhat, and it really works in the shot. Now, a couple of subtle things I'll mention here is like the jiggle, things like that. Again, it's so subtle to look at, but the way that these creature systems work is that you're going to have your bone system, and then that's essentially your rig that's tied to your rig. And nothing there is really fancy about that, but then you're gonna have your muscle system on top, and then skin is sitting on top of that. So the muscles drive everything, and the bigger the creature, the more you expect there to be follow through with the muscles. When a creature lands from jumping off of a car or something, you're gonna see the jiggle, you're gonna see the muscles gonna follow through and then move back into place. And so some of this stuff you hand animate in terms of follow through with a character landing that are just land stiff. They'll land and they'll follow through. They'll come back and readjust. So it's more compensating and trying to keep balance the entire time. But at the same time, then there's also the muscles. And the muscles are going to have their own motion because they have jiggle to them as well. A good example, if you look at, I think Weta has Tissue. I could be wrong about that. I think it's Tissue. Their system, and they have some tests they'd shown like 7 years ago or something of some horses they've been simulating, stuff like that. But that's a good example. I mentioned The Mummy before, and that actually was based on some work that ILM had been developing for a long time for Hulk. This is for the 2003 Hulk, but way before that, back in like 97, 98. And they took those systems and then implemented it into The Mummy. And so those were some of the first times you would see these muscle systems. And then Jurassic Park 3, they used muscle systems on that. You know, and then bit by bit it became more standardized. But I feel like it's only been the last 10 years that a lot of regular studios, in other words, not ILM and not Weta, have really started to embrace using muscle systems a lot more. And there's just like a lot of subtlety you'll not otherwise get. It's the same thing. You would usually have 2 bones for your lungs, and those would just be something that would occasionally breathe. You know, little subtle things, but all this stuff really matters. It's a little bit more forgivable with a creature like this where you have a lot of fur on top, although at the same time it's not as forgiving because there's patches inside of him that are completely open as well. Luckily he doesn't breathe, I assume. You can see all the bones protruding and, you know, all the scuffles, you know, things like that, all the scratches, all the skin deteriorating, as well as perhaps being torn from being attacked, stuff like that. So it's pretty obvious, like, you know, from day one, the minute he makes a comment, I've forgotten this character's name, but this guy here, it was obvious that, you know, he's going to get killed by the tiger. You can kind of see the pairings very early on where the writing's on the wall. And of course, him being such a despicable character, you know that he's going to get it worse than anyone else in the show. So this is something else I figured I'd mention, because you have your creature animation, and then you have your character TDs, which are going to be rigging it all and perhaps doing skin simulations, fur, hair, cloth, stuff like that. But there's also a lot of creature effects, things like this, where drool, things like that, it's just a nice touch to add in, because a lot of the time you got these 3D characters that we've seen 100 times, and essentially it's just geometry, and then you're layering fur on top of it. Adding little things like the CG drool, things like that, just really help the shot overall. And so it's just a nice touch there. Again, little subtle things like the wince in the eye. So this stuff here, I did see a making of thing of it, but like it's pretty obvious. Like there's some stuff in here, it's wire work. I mean, it's either that or you go a digital double, which you could completely do for stuff like that. So it's kind of odd that it goes from the talents, and then there's this weird jump here where it goes to a digi-double. It's either that or they're taking 2 different takes and it's just not blending together too well. Because that's something you'll do too, but I just can't imagine, unless you're a stunt person, that they're swinging into the car to get that performance. That's a weird one. Because occasionally what you will do to make something feel more violent is you'll cut out frames. And that goes back to the spaghetti western days where you get someone to punch someone, you cut out the couple frames before it connects, and that way it actually follows through. Because usually you go to punch someone, you're going to slow down because there's that hesitation when you're acting out a punch, because, you know, obviously you don't want to hit them. So what they would do is cut out those 2 or 3 frames. It would feel like it connects, and therefore it feels a lot more violent. There's a couple of movies like Equalizer with Denzel. We're doing some stuff like that in comp where we would go one step further and fix the arm so that way it actually did connect with the face, and then we would warp the face to actually feel like it's being displaced from the punch. And I hope that a lot more movies start to kind of embrace that style, because it just makes it look way more dramatic. You really feel it. I was going to talk about actually some of the punching and shooting in here, but I just feel like it's outside the scope of what we're going to talk about. But it's pretty obvious. You can see the punches are like nowhere close to their face in this one. Like, you know, that's what I mean. Like Equalizer was a good example where they went and adjusted that to make sure it really feels like you're connecting with the other person. So a lot of this is just wire work. At least a good example here is where you got someone strung up on wires, and you just have someone or 2 people, I assume, for something like this where it's meant to be this rough, and the tiger's meant to be that strong. Probably like 2 people just dragging him, and that way you're able to get that performance, and then you just paint them out of the shot. But the whole point is to make this as violent as possible. The real secret is if you do use a digital double, that's when you can get really aggressive, because you can have that interaction. You can have them being responding to being dragged around a lot more, but you're also then creating more work for yourself. I think they made all the right decisions here, having him in frame, and then just having him being tossed around. The only thing it doesn't make sense is, like I said, like this here just looks odd. So weird. I mean, you could say it's one of the jump cuts that they were doing earlier on, but I don't think it is the case. But I think they're just taking two performances and putting them together. Because if it was a digi-double, you probably wouldn't have that mistake. You would line them up on the start frame. And I apologize that I'm kind of jumping around a little bit with these. Just it is YouTube, so I don't want to get flagged for playing too much of the film. So he's meant to be, I assume... Okay, yeah, shaking off all the rocks. I'm kind of interested now. Yeah, okay, yeah, there's definitely wire work. Because you can see how awkward it is. He is yanked up, and then you can see that it's the center of the ropes there, so he starts to pivot around. I'm assuming that's a stunt person anyway, but yeah, it's wires there. Actually, one last thing. Yeah, I was just looking at the integration on the ground. I like the sand effects. It's more dust, but we've got some nice displacement on the ground. Like, again, I feel like a lot of the time with shots like this, it's more about how it interacts with the environment. I remember Jurassic Park 3, one of the really big innovations they had in that film wasn't the creatures. They did introduce muscles into the dinosaurs, but it was more the foliage and all the trees and the vines and leaves and grass, all the stuff that they had built for the film that allowed everything to interact a lot more. And at the time I was thinking, what a waste, like who cares about trees and leaves and stuff, because creatures are way more interesting. But the thing is, at the end of the day, that's what's really going to tie everything in together. When a dinosaur is walking on some footage on grass, it works. It's not that interesting though. But when you actually have a dinosaur navigating through the trees and the trees are all shaking, and when it steps on a log, the log reacts to it. Like everything starts to tie together and integrate together a lot more. Suddenly it feels like it's actually there. And it is such a critical thing, and it's those subtle things that you overlook. You're not thinking about the CG trees. A good example, I won't go on too much of a tangent, but a good example is in Jurassic Park, the T-Rex in the first one is trying to attack the kids in the Jeep. And the Jeep is actually completely CG. And most people aren't aware of that. Most people are thinking like, oh yeah, it's just a CG dinosaur on top of the Jeep. But for it to interact, to be able to bite on the tire and rip the rubber off of it and everything else, like that was a completely computer-generated Jeep, which in 1993 was a big deal. But you're not thinking about that. You're actually more just thinking CG dinosaur. But those things are what really ties it together. I assume that's CG? That's why I was saying weird, because I personally wouldn't approve that stuff. It's just too solid, but I feel like if you're getting that in camera, then it's a lot more forgiving, because it's like, well, that's what it looks like. Anyway. So, I'm going to talk about this shot really quick. There is some making of stuff here that I thought it'd be fun to talk about, and more specifically, the head sim. So, I love this. I think it's such a cool shot to have, where they've actually got the prop of the head here, just because it's important for this part here, because you want to know where he's being attacked so we can actually react properly to it. But the sim, I feel like it's the same setup as the alpha in video 2 we talked about, where his head, when he gets shot point blank, explodes everywhere. You can kind of see, in fact, some of that kind of plexus joint stuff happening there that I mentioned. and that's why I figure it is. But you know, all you're doing is you're getting the area that's bidden to compress down, and it's also attached to the CG tiger's mouth, so it pulls it off, whereas the rest of it is anchored on the ground. So just to point this out, basically this part of the head is all anchored on the ground, and then this part of the head is all anchored to the mouth. And then you have this plexus weird stuff kind of stitched together, where based on the tension, it's going to break these joint relationships and they'll snap out. But then you're doing a crap load of fluid, so that's just emitting from stuff inside of here. Typically, you just make some weird shapes to emit from, rather than it being a constant flow, and like a noise map, something like that. And then you have, you know, some other stuff kind of spurting out from a few different directions. But that's kind of how you do it. I don't feel like it's too difficult. I really like, yeah, this shot here. I really like this a lot more. I just kind of feel like that was really interestingly put together. And this looks great. Just I feel like it's more piggybacking on that other guy, this one here being the hero shot that the system was built for. And then this is where it's kind of borrowed and repurposed for the setup. But it looks awesome. Really cool stuff. So just to talk about all the CG creature stuff, I thought this would be a good one just to kind of break this all down. Basically, you've got the green screen. You got this guy. That'd be an interesting one for the resume. It's like, oh, I was playing the tiger. And then you have the clean plate here. Good thing is everything's out of focus, which makes life easier. Here's the bone system. And the only bits that you can see are actually colored here is just the actual fangs, I guess you'd call them. Just because the majority of this you're not really going to see. So the bones are just basically attached to the character rig. They're not doing anything fancy. And then you have your muscle system. And obviously you don't have muscles on the face per se, because a lot of the time that's just going to be an actual animation rig. And you use the muscles for flexing when joints are being compressed down, or at the same time just for jiggle, stuff like that. That's typically, it's more to see stuff shifting under the skin. Whereas like in the face, you're not really going to see that as much. And the animation that you do have is all going to be a lot more specifically controlled. So that's the whole muscle setup. And then you have the actual skin. So this is the sculpted model. So this is where you'll go in, start with an original tiger, and then you model it all out. And then you look at, okay, let's deteriorate this. I think there's some concept sketches in here somewhere. I'll take a look. But usually you would start to model out all the deterioration and things like that. So half of his face gone. I'm not sure what their tool setup is, but you could assume ZBrush for sculpting and Mari for texturing, something like that. But again, I'm just guessing what their tech stack is. But this is basically the 3D model, the textures, everything else. And the textures are important, even though you're not going to see them. They're important just because it's usually what the fur and everything will be generating from where it spawned. So now you can see it suddenly becomes a lot brighter because this is the fur pass on top. And you can see all the gnarly kind of, other fur here that's all dirtied up and deteriorating around the edges. So what you would have is you've got your clean model, let's say, but then you'll have like an edge, and this whole edge would basically say this whole area is gnarly. It's all kind of what kind of looks wet. It's not wet, but just in terms of clumping, stuff like that, and being more dirty, things like that. So you typically have a mask around all this stuff just to point out like where's all the gnarly fur going to be generated, where's there no fur, which is essentially all of this, and then where's all the clean fur around here. And you're just painting that like you're painting weights, kind of either a custom texture map or just straight painting onto the model. But that's allowing you to get like very specific with what you actually see. And you see now like there is muscles on here. It's just when we're looking at this is a muscle system. Whereas this stuff here, I think, is actual muscles that are built into the face as being part of it. So you can see there's exposed jawline, and that's part of it, is like where you're seeing these muscles moving around. but they're not a muscle system. It's just part of the facial rig. So here's another one. So you can see the tiger walking around. It looks great, like really cool. So you got one guy here. You probably got a few other people off camera controlling the pulley system. I thought it would be 2 people, but okay, I guess 1 person's all you need for that. And yeah, usually you're gonna have like 2 people off camera, like pulling this stuff, so it's kind of a group collaboration. You can see here some of the elements really quick. So obviously removing him, a clean plate, skeleton, muscles, whole deal, contact shadows, and then you have all the dust and everything else to help integrate it together. Another one here, so you got one person who, you can see it's a rigged puppet, so that way he's able to probably slide the jaw open and closed through pulling on the thing. So you have one person controlling the puppet head, and the other person is essentially pressing him down, pretending to be the weight of the tiger itself. So let's talk about this stuff really quick. So obviously reference footage, and usually in the beginning, just to kind of do a test, and this sometimes is a paid test that you're actually doing for the client. In other words, for Warner Brothers, I think it's Snyder, so Warner Brothers. But what you're doing is getting some footage of a tiger, and then you're actually going and imitating the animation and everything else, trying to make a believable result. So as you're doing this, usually something like this is not necessarily for internal use, like, hey, we'll make the tiger and then we'll make the zombie tiger. What you're doing is you've been given, let's say, 80 grand or 150K, whatever it might be, to do like a crude test, but one to imitate making a real tiger that you can then prove to the studio and get their confidence that you're the studio to choose to do this sort of stuff. So usually when you're working on a movie that this is such a pivotal thing, they might shop around to a few different studios and say, do us a test. We want to see, who comes up with the best thing, or even just for one specific studio, just we're going to pick you guys, but we need you to do a test just to make sure that you guys can actually pull off this thing, because we're concerned it might look CG or whatever. So that's where looking at some footage is a chance to create that concept and prove that you can do the work. Other times it is just like you need a controlled shot. So that's where usually on a show, you'll pick a hero shot and you work on that one first and you noodle that one to death. And once it looks great, or in some cases, it might be a couple of shots with different controlled circumstances. So one could be having it attack someone. Another one might be having it, in outdoor lighting, whatever it might be. Just a few different situation tests. So that way you can have it go through a couple of rounds and really test it out and make sure that in every situation it holds up. And that's usually what you will do. And then once you've locked that in and gotten the feedback, then you start rolling out to all the other shots. Otherwise, you might get into outdoor lighting and it's not really holding up the same. So then you start modifying it all there. And then suddenly it's inconsistent with other shots. So you got to go and try and keep everything consistent. So it's better to have a few controlled tests. And initially, basing it on reality is a good idea. So having something to imitate first is really important. So there's always that as well. And this is just one more thing I figured I'd mention. So this, I think, is just kind of more pointing out where any of the jiggle is happening, I think. So they're basically saying the belly will always jiggle, and then whenever there's an impact, it's detecting, it's just visualizing, like allowing you to see where the jiggle is happening. So in the legs, as well as around the torso as well. I believe that's what it represents. It could be wrong, but I assume that's what's happening here. So something like this is just a Macbeth chart, and this is just so you can capture everything and recalibrate it to make sure it's consistent with what you captured on the day. And so you have this map here, and again, like these colors mean nothing to everyone else. It's internally what they represent, but I'd assume that this might be to do with the skin, how it acts on the edges. So this is kind of more of an edge map just to get it to perhaps act a little bit differently in certain situations. I would assume it's either that or it's for a fur map to be able to say that these areas are clumped and dirty and everything, but I don't know if that's the case here. I think it's perhaps just these are the edges of the skin and getting them to act differently, or even just blend in all the dirty, deteriorated texture maps, however it might be. And this is just a turntable. So you see one where it's turning, this is pretty standard, one where it's turning to see how it interacts with the lighting as it's going around, as well as seeing it from every angle, but then you're seeing one where the lighting orbits around it, so you can get an idea of how that works as well. Yeah, so this is the concept art, so you can kind of see that, and again, like as things go into 3D, things will change, but usually the production designer will be working with a concept artist to paint all these up and show that to the director, get feedback, and lock that in, and then they're communicating with the studio to replicate that sort of look to it. I kind of feel like this is way more creepy with the guy there instead. So you have your diffuse pass, which is no lighting or anything, and then you have it integrated into the shot. There's the Macbeth chart we're just talking about here, so that way, again, all the colors and everything get calibrated to match. The turntable, and the lighting shifting as well. You got your chrome ball and your gray ball, and the matte gray is there to represent the lighting, and that's entirely CG as well. I mean, this whole shot CG, but again, what you're doing is you capture all this information on the day, and then you're going and replicating all that. So that's kind of the easiest way to match the lighting, is to be able to get your gray ball and try and match up your gray ball, CG gray ball to it as a good standpoint to kind of get there a lot quicker. So I believe this is all in Atlanta, Georgia. There's a dolly system. They're shooting, and they're shooting on reds, I believe. It's a prime lens, matte box, red camera, all set up. And there's our final shot. So I thought this would be fun. It's kind of different. I wasn't quite sure what I'd be covering in this, just knowing that it's creature stuff, that it's kind of like, once you understand what it's doing, unless there's anything specific like the deaths in here, the kills, most of this is going to be all the same. But hopefully I shed some light on some of this stuff. Like I said, it's a little bit different, but I'm kind of curious. I'd love to get your feedback. If you want to leave a comment and let me know. I'm not fishing for comments. I'm actually saying this because I genuinely want to know like what you guys want to see, and whether going really in depth on this stuff or focusing more on specifically the visual effects process or pipeline or tools or whatever. Let me know what you want to know more specifically about, and I'm happy to go all in on that. Okay, but hopefully you found this valuable. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back tomorrow with the next part in the series. Each week I plan to review a different film and share as many insights as I can with you. And if there's a particular movie that you want to see covered, leave a comment below and let me know. Or if there's any big questions not answered here in this video that you would like to see covered, let me know as well. I'm happy to hear from you. Creating these videos weekly is a lot of work, but I love sharing and I love helping other creators like yourself. All I ask is if you want to support this channel as well as ensure that I can create more of these videos, please like and subscribe to my channel, as well as feel free to spread the word so that others can benefit from these videos as well. Like I said, it might not mean much to you, but it'll mean the world to me. And you won't miss out on any of the upcoming content that I put out daily. This has been an absolute pleasure. All of this content I make for free, so that way you can get a better understanding of the visual effects process and filmmaking as well. One last thing, I just recently put out a free course on how to raise your prices, as well as how to land your dream clients as an artist. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, both as an artist as well as a manager, hiring artists as well as managing them, and of course, paying them as well. So I'm very familiar with this topic. For me, it's a pet peeve when people say that there's no money in art There's no career as an artist or art doesn't pay. I want to eliminate the starving artist mindset for good. That's why I've created this 8-hour free course on everything I know about pricing yourself as an artist, how to raise your prices, how to land your dream clients that are willing to pay you what you're worth. And at least for now, this course is completely free to download. So get the entire 8-hour free course at pricingclass.com or click the link below in the description so that way you can check it out there as well. And if you like this video, I've put another video somewhere up above me that I think you're also going to like as well. I've also put a link to the playlist for all the visual effects breakdowns that you can check out that I've created as well. I'm Allan McKay.